And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Valley of the Judge. Jeez, I almost screwed up my own intro again. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me as always is my good brother here in the temple, the man behind the Monarch's Tribunal, good brother Monarch.
I am somewhat dreading this one today, because we have had one consistent theme that's like kind of carried us through Megalos, And that is they start off with some kind of an interesting premise, and they just cannot seem to hit the landing. So on our third class we're talking about this time, I'm suspecting we're going to see the exact same thing.
Yeah. I already have a feeling on how I'm going to be grading Megalos, but there is always the possibility that some monkey wrench gets thrown my way as we go through this. But, and I will note, let me get the obvious question out of my system right now, because we end up having to ask this every single time this kind of thing comes up. Is this as bad as Valhalla? No.
No.
Not a chance. It would have to try in a Herculean fashion to get on that level. I'm pretty sure it'll be several years before we find something like that again.
Look, at the very least, this has some ideas. It has kind of a core it's building off of, which is more than I can say for whatever the hell Valhalla ended up being.
What I will say is that Megalos is probably one of the more frustrating games that I've come across as part of the Valley. Because of what was mentioned before. But anyway, let me switch this over to 2-page. So witches are battle mages par excellence, practical magicians whose approach to the mysteries of the eldritch and divine is one both pragmatic and joyful. They are the etherologists who ask how a particular spell form is materially useful rather than bothering with heady philosophies and conceptual alchemy. As such, they are scorned by wealthy, classically trained occultists from the balconies of their ivory towers. The name witch was originally meant to be insulting, intending to connotate a wild and earthy sort of spellcaster, a peasant dabbling in magics. Witches took the name gladly, turning it into a badge of honor to differentiate themselves from the magocratic elite. They are punk rock spellcasters devoted to the democratization of magic and the egalitarian future for aetherology. A bit odd in that last paragraph, but okay. So the 3 callings we have are Droloi, which are leech mages, Scythes, who they study mind magic, it says, so they are basically psychics, and rune magi, who are glyph mages, and whose magic is tied up in symbol and language. So, even before we get into it, we already have that issue of introducing elements of modern day into this setting, especially with rune magic being suppressed by the powers that be for its potential.
It was covered briefly in like previous shows, but there have been things we've just skipped over or glanced that we usually might have given a bit more of a look, just because there's some obvious modern buzzwords and personal beliefs getting shoved in that it makes it a very difficult read.
Would you say that it makes the read a bit of an anachronism?
Kind of, yeah. I think that's a decent way to put it.
But anyways, then we get to the rules. They learn 2 forms of spells, cantrips and sorceries. Cantrips are minor magical effects that build up power that's eventually discharged with a sorcery, sending a cascade of previously set dominoes tumbling down. The Aether Current is Aether Charges, which they talk about manifesting differently for different types of witches. But when it comes to the Aether Current dice, when a combat encounter begins, place all 4 of your Aether Current dice on your sheet or somewhere else convenient. You don't need to roll them yet. Whenever you use a cantrip, you roll 1 of your AC dice, and if the result is 1 to 4, you've accumulated a weak Aether charge. If it's 5 to 6, you've accumulated a Surthing Aether charge. In either case, put the die on the charge you've rolled for the power you've used, so that you remember what kind of charges you've built up. When you use a sorcery power, in addition to resolving that power as normal, you resolve all of the Aether charge effects you have saved up. When Aether charges are triggered by the use of a sorcery power, the AC dice associated with those charges are burned. They do not return to your AC dice pool. You can regain them by drinking an Aether potion or the power-up action. This is good. Now, how I feel about this compared to some of the other Aether mechanics we've seen is going to be based on how those dice are used. Of the two that we saw when it came to Aether dice, I'd say the Throne was better-ish, but I think even then we said it was kind of restrictive for what it was doing.
Yeah.
In fact, if I recall correctly, didn't we have a whole thing about whether or not the insistence on the use of D6s may have created a problem?
Yeah. I think we both agreed it was like limiting to a point where the effect wasn't worth it. Limiting it always to the 1d6 plus, what was it, up to 2 if you're really high level, was the problem. I know we both kind of had our own different ideas of how to correct for that, but it just ended up not being a worthwhile effect because it was just d6.
Yeah, now in the case of the Throne, now in the case of the first class that we covered, that was a case of odds and evens, and I don't think that was the real problem that we had.
Yeah.
When it came to the Corona with Thrones, I think it was over the fact that you are this idea that you are weakening yourself to perform your flashy moves didn't sit with us. Even if you can get this stuff back through the power-up action, so it isn't like a Vancian affair, it still leaves a sour taste in my mouth to do that kind of thing, unless you give... If you're going to put that sort of cost on there, it should be something that makes it worth it. Now, let me get to which relevant rules, and a lot of these we've already covered. We've already mentioned cantrips. Things like AoE and Aura have already been mentioned. Phantasms are specific tags to more illusory spells. They create or somehow manipulate an illusionary duplicate of your character, which is under your limited mental control. Sacrifice is I cast their HP. Sigil, it has a range of 0, or sigil powers have a range of 0, placing an arcane sigil on the ground beneath you. The next valid target to enter the zone triggers the sigil, causing it to disappear. Okay, so rune traps. And the other thing is sorcery, we've already mentioned that. And then we have the advancement table. Which
As usual, I think it's worthwhile to kind of point out a couple of the random talents just so we get an idea of what a witch talent is actually going to entail. So let's say Ego Shield. Scythe only. While you have any active phantasms, gain +1 soak to rolls. Bonus increases to 2 at level 3. So, alright. And lesser glyph spells. Rune Magus only. You know a variety of lesser glyphs that can be woven together to easily perform some minor magics. This includes things like briefly doubling my voice's decibel level, or strengthening or revitalizing ailing plants and crops. We got a short list here of things that it would do. So I think it is kind of kicking with the theme. Like, I think we both kind of been happy with a good variety of talents for each class.
Yeah. I don't think the talents were ever an issue.
Yeah.
But the first calling that we have is the Drilloi, who are referred to as masters of biomatic magics. The body's physical and their humors are entwined in a balance. Drilloi pull up the threads which make up their enemies' bodies and souls, and use what they extract to heal and fortify their allies. Why am I thinking of a Biomancer Psyker from Dark Heresy? But they are a support role. They're referred to as a Drain Healer. Base HP is 28. Base defenses is 8 dodge and 8 ward. Base damage is 4. Recovery is 8. Recovery base is 1/4 max. And they start with the Redistribute bonus power. You may choose to advance it instead of taking a normal power advance as normal. I know what I said. And bonus abilities do not count against your normal maximum number of powers or talents. So Redistribute. It's a minor action with the attack, auto hit, and healing tags. Targets one foe in range 1. Deals 5 piercing damage, and one ally within range 1 heals 5. Its first advances, you can increase the damage and healing by 1. Or you can increase its power to a major action to target a second foe in range and heal a different ally in range as well. Which, alright, so we essentially have a damage healer. Not a terrible idea.
And then we have the cantrips. We kind of covered how these work briefly earlier with taking minor actions. How many of these do we actually have? That's 6 options for it. Not bad.
Not bad. Let me check how many cantrips you could pop out at. 5.
So eventually you're getting all but one of them at the highest levels.
Yep.
See, a number of these will do things like damage and heal from both. Yeah, both Drain Ether and Drain Blood seem to do that, but they'll do different status effects that'll hit the opponent.
Yeah. And, of course, as mentioned, when you use cantrips, you build up Aether charges. You can only have a maximum of 4 charges across all of them. They remain in place until discharged. And this is where the weakened surging charge effect comes into play for each. I.e., these would end up happening when those effects would end up activating when you use a sorcery. But there are some like Sanguine Pavis that are more about sacrificing HP. But with a lot of them, a lot of what we're seeing, there's a you get some, you lose some kind of thing with these cantrips. But then we get to sorceries. Unlike cantrips are minor actions, sorceries are major actions. where after the sorcery resolves, all of the aether charges that you've built up, if any, are activated and resolved as well. Although I do love the descriptor for blood alchemy here. A bit of blood alchemy never hurt anyone too badly, at least not recently. Its effect is you regain 1 spent point of recovery for every 4 HP sacrificed. One ally in your zone also heals 4 HP as long as you sacrifice at least 8 HP to use this power. You can advance it to increase the sacrifice to 12, or advance it to that one ally in the zone gains reach out. So, given what we see with sorcery, I think this is the rare case where the Aether Die system actually ends up working the way it's supposed to. I guess 1 out of 3 ain't bad, because I don't see much of an issue so far.
The only thing I would take slight issue with on this are a number of these cantrips feel very similar to each other. They kind of do enough difference that it's not big, but a big issue. So I'm leaning towards I'm kind of liking this better than the other 2 classes.
Yeah. I could see this being a bit of a pain if you're playing this virtual tabletop. But if you're playing this in person, where you could print out your cantrips and then assign what gets a weaker and what gets a surging charge, I think that'd be significantly easier. Because at the end of the day, this is a builder spender that's more about combinations. But then we have the
next
scythe.
So let's see. Scythes are the psychic spellcasters. They see themselves as the next step in magical evolution from the dark age practices of the elder arts into the light of the brave new day. Their methods differ from traditional spells, mostly in how they are created, through their
surprise, motherfucker.
though their effects would seem no different to most.
Hello there, monkey. How are you doing? Thank you for the raid. For those of you joining who do not know me, my name is Mildra. I am your one and only gaming monk, and this evening, alongside Monarch, we are going into the 3rd class and calling combination of Megalos, this time covering witches.
It is going better than the last 2.
Mm-hmm.
Marginally better, at least. Well, let's see, where was I? Yes, their methods differ from traditional spells, mostly in how they're created, though their effects would seem no different to most lay folk. They don't use elaborate incantations or materials or gestures, but instead visualize and prepare their spells entirely within their own minds, and then use the power of their imaginations to make their spells a reality. Roll Striker as Striker Duelists. They gain 4 damage from being set up, empowered, or when exploiting the exposed status.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so I think this is one of the only times I've seen so far where the setup that can be done from some of the Throne classes can be applied to this class instead of just a Throne type. I do like that. See, base HP 24, 8 dodge and ward, 6 base damage, 4 recovery.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Excuse me. But then we have the Scythe Calling bonus power. At level 0, you gain the Pledge minor power. You may choose to advance it instead. So like any of the other bonus powers. So the Pledge. Minor action Phantasm. 1 zone in range 1. Create a phantasm of yourself in the targeted zone. If the targeted zone has 1 or more foes, one of those foes suffers 2 piercing damage. For the advances, foes damaged by this power gain Afraid, or I can use this power as a major action to repeat its effects on a different target in range. And I still hate that the powers randomly start referring to yourself in the first person as you read it, instead of saying you like everywhere else.
Yeah. People get on me for some of my writing consistencies, but I was never this bad.
I hate that so much.
But then we have the cantrips for the scythe, which I'd say that similarity issue that you saw previously, I don't think that's as much the case here.
There does seem to be a slightly better just variance in the different cantrips here than the first calling.
Yeah. Though what's kind of amusing is that even though this is a striker role, there's a lot of territory control within these cantrips, especially something like Fog of War.
That might be the longest effect of any of these abilities we've seen so far.
Mm-hmm. But then, when it comes to the sorceries, we have a much similar setup to what we saw before, though there's some that have some special effects beyond their normal ones, like Scything Mind, where if a non-minion target is injured or defeated by the power, you gain 1 AC die, which is going to be useful. But
this seems to be playing with a lot more just varied effects in buffs and debuffs.
What I find interesting is that the side is very much built around this notion of the psychic as a performer. Almost a bit of showman.
Striker just sounds like a weird role with all these effects.
It's definitely a far more combative role, so it technically makes sense. But it is
I'll run with it, I guess.
It is stretching the concept of Striker compared to some of the others, since Strikers are meant to be kind of glass cannon-y.
This feels very support to me.
But lastly is the Rune Magus, which are also a striker and referred to as magic artillery. Kind of interesting that we have 2 callings that are both strikers. We don't have a defense-oriented calling. Base HP is 24. Defenses are 8 dodge and 8 ward. Base damage is 6. Recovery is 4. Recovery base is 1/4 max. And their bonus power is Xenosyntax, which is a minor power. Targets 1 foe in range 3. Test is weapon dice versus ward. It does half core damage and astral on a hit. And you generate 1 temporary weak charge for a cantrip you know, lasting until the end of your next turn. If not spent by then, it is lost. One of the advances is your next attack has advantage, or it inflicts 1 damage for each charge you currently have. See, this feels more like what I think we would typically expect of a striker.
Yes, definitely.
But then we get to its cantrip. Which a lot of them are either doing damage. There's one. I think we've seen at least one each time that has some sort of barrier effect. But there's a good amount of piercing damage. At least throughout the cantrips that we see here.
This does seem to carry into the sorceries, where just at a quick glance,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things are doing damage, varying types of damage. Damage even on misses.
Mm-hmm. And not just half damage too, and some of them. But
I'm mostly glancing to see if we have any kind of variance outside of damage, and we do have abilities like gravitation, which just drags multiple people into one area.
mm-hmm.
Still doing damage. It's okay.
And it does, and that one is tied to charges, so there is so you do have a purpose of using charges aside from just spenders.
And I do like that last one, Paracausal Light. If you have no charges when you use it, gain a weak charge on a cantrip you possess. So we got a sorcery that you can use to also build charges. With a decent minor effect on it too, with its astral damage and stunned on an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a good little list of abilities.
Yeah. Of the three three colleagues that we've seen with the witch, I would say the Rune Meg is probably the best designed in terms of its theme.
Definitely.
This
is something I'm going to kind of point out, though.
Hmm.
What even is the point in having the striker subtype? Or any of those, very specific subtypes?
I feel like that is trying to... It has the DNA of the role setup that we saw in the edition I'm supposed to hate, but I don't because the check bounced. But the thing is, with those roles, there was a degree of consistency. Now, some have argued that there was too much consistency, but consider this: defenders were all about taking hits and drawing aggro. Strikers were all about focusing on specific targets, but couldn't take very strong hits. Healers were about healing and buffing, and controllers were about debuffs and AoE. And regardless of source, regardless of class that those roles were in, that part of it you could always rely on. If you're picking a striker, you're probably going to be focusing on marking targets in some way. Now, what you do,
I don't
with
feel like that
marking,
consistency's here is the problem.
Yeah. With here, we've just gone through 2 striker callings, and what makes them a striker seems to vary quite a bit. Of what I'd expect of a striker, Rune Magus feels more on the mark.
Yeah. Whereas I think the last one they called the striker felt a lot more like some type of support, with all of its buffing and debuffing.
If I used the 4 roles approach, it would feel more like a controller, since there was a lot of area control within its kit.
I just think that might have been an unnecessary distinction in this system, since there's not the consistency to that you would expect. I'm not gonna say that's like a big hit against this game or anything. It just seemed like a pointless tag to put on certain callings.
Although,
You kind of have to already explain what each one's general idea is anyway, even with that tag there.
and when it comes,
It's just a little extra that didn't need to be on, is all.
Oh. When it comes to let me check something. So the three roles that we have here are support, tank, and striker. I really think a fourth should have been put in, or at the very least, some that are referred to as strikers really. Actually, I wonder if part of the problem may be due to the relationship between base damage and recoveries for the roles may have caused an unintended effect. Since the idea is support gets the most amount of recoveries, but the lowest amount of base damage. Same with tanks, though they're in the medium end of things. And I wonder if that may have been something of a mistake.
Yeah. Especially since it's all listed out on each calling anyway.
Yep. And hello there, Chop. I see you in the chat.
This is a very minor nitpick on my part. Leave it in, take it out. I don't think anything changes. It just seemed like an odd choice to include the striker role descriptions on all of these, even when there really wasn't a need for it.
Even with that, I'd say a bigger thing that you and I have noticed is some roles being referred to as strikers when they shouldn't, and I think it comes down to not having that common thread. Because with the Scythe and with the Rune Magus here, these are referred to as strikers. Aside from them both having the same core mechanics as of the Witch class, what do they really have in common?
Not much. They're very obviously filling different roles in a party.
Yeah.
That's a good thing for the record.
Mm-hmm. But
I just don't think the descriptors of striker, tank, and support really benefit this system.
When you look at games that will have defined roles, each of those roles has a degree of consistency. You go into any MMO that you may have played in the last 25 years, and that golden triangle of tank, DPS, healer is not going to change all that much. What I mean is, if you pick up a, regardless of MMO, if you pick up a class or a character that's a tank, you can reasonably expect to understand some parts of its kit. Some of the finer details are going to change, but there's generally the rule of you're here to draw aggro and outlast. It doesn't. And to bring it back to 4th edition, for example, fighters and paladins are both defenders, which is that game's version of tank. They accomplish that through different means, but the drawing aggro is still a big part of their kit. Which can I really say is the case here?
No. Again, like, I just dropped the role listing
Yeah.
and just leave stats as is on all of the classes. It changes nothing. It just felt like an odd choice.
Especially since role is supposed to be a summary of what you're doing. But,
That said, in general, with the witch class, like, we did kind of go into this for people who may not have heard the last couple class overviews we did. Each one felt weirdly bottlenecked. Well, I don't think that's quite here. My mind was kind of like thinking as we were reading this, like, is this bottlenecked in some way? A little bit, just because I think some of the cantrips aren't really varied enough to make them that interesting, and you're basically using those building up to your sorceries. So I think depending on how many cantrips you have at a given time, so early game, problem, not so much later, you don't really have many options while you're building up to the sorceries. Once you get those after a turn or two and start throwing them out, I think all is golden.
I don't think this is nearly as bottom. Of the three that we covered, this is the least bottlenecked.
Yeah.
Like the Invoker, I'd say is the biggest offender when it comes to bottlenecked design, because no matter what level you are, the options you have are very limited.
Yeah, the Invoker is easily the worst of them. That does not seem fun. This one, it's a bit of a bottleneck. I think would be a little frustrating. I think some of the classes would do it, or some of the callings were better in that regard than others.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I forget the one I said immediately. It was like, these effects aren't very varied amongst these cantrips. So with that one, I think you're going to be feeling like you're doing the same thing several turns, no matter what cantrips you're grabbing. Less so with the other two callings.
Yeah,
but either way, I don't think it's nearly as bad as those last two.
No, it's... However, when I look back at the calling system that we have here, we come back to one major theme when it comes to classes and callings, which is there seems to always be some element that ends up holding the class or calling back from its full potential. Some big-ass asterisk that we end up having to put on it.
Yeah, it's made talking about these classes very frustrating, because there's things I like about each one of these.
Mm-hmm.
They came into this with some good ideas. Just, they've not been able to really stick a landing.
And I do have to. There's a part of me that wonder. I could go into why I call the larger groups classes, but that's splitting hairs, and I leave splitting hairs in naming conventions to people who want to argue about pedantry. I don't do that. What I will note, however, is it feels like there's an attempt at establishing a formula with the class design, but it isn't seen through the whole way.
Yeah.
And as far as the very bottlenecked approach, I guess it's an attempt to try and make it so that characters don't get too powerful, but as I mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago, this game is a power fantasy. Regardless of what?
Like, I don't mind the idea of like trying to keep stuff from getting too outrageous. But consistently, I think they have overcorrected on that regard.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And funny thing is, I ended up saying that kind of thing during my falling out with D&D Next, especially in regard to what happened to the whole maneuver system. I very much felt that was an overcorrection. But I think the only thing that we didn't have a problem with was talents.
That's a nice little system. Like, pick some talents, let you personalize yourself a little more in even the callings. Nothing we glanced over seemed like outrageously good with like how powerful it got. None of them seemed bad. It's like you have a nice list of good options for tweaking and customizing your class. I like things like that.
Mm-hmm.
It all just came down to the actual rules of each class, which I also like the idea of having a different setup of rules for how each class operates. It seems like it's not going to like be... They seem to be designed well enough they're not going to be getting in each other's way in that regard. Like, it still all feels like the same system. Yet each class still feels like it would handle quite differently.
Mm-hmm.
There are some very well-designed aspects to this system so far.
Yeah. But with that said, I think there are some nitpicks I could have, like what is the point of a level 0, but I think the big one that we have, if we had to do the elevator pitch on what our issue is with the class calling system, is bottlenecking.
Yeah.
Like with some of them, now if I had to rate them from best to worst in terms of how they were designed, I think the Invoker is at the bottom.
Easily.
The Throne is in the middle, and the Witch is at the top. That's not to say that the Witch is the best class. It's just the one that has the bottlenecking problem the least.
Yeah. I think it'd also be the easiest to kind of correct for, because I look at the cantrip list like, okay, just vary the cantrips a little bit more. So using one or the other doesn't feel quite as much the same. Maybe start them off with more than one cantrip.
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of corrects the bottlenecking issue I had with the witches right there. It gives you more options, makes it a little bit funner because of that. And I don't see any way it's going to like get crazy if you're worried about trying to curb just crazy power gaming. I think that would be a very easy solution here.
Which, in my opinion, power gaming is going to happen no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying just let the power gamers break your game, but I do think it can be maneuvered to lessen the issue. Is when you end up overcorrecting in this manner, it almost sends the message of don't get good at our mechanics.
Yeah. Like, I think there's a balance there. Like, you don't want stuff that's so crazy good you look at it and go, like, even people who don't know much would just look at your thing and go, why would I not pick that? I.e. 3rd edition wildcasting as a druid.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so obviously better than everything. But we don't really have anything like that here.
Pretty much.
So I don't see the need to like just restrict as much as this game wants to.
Yeah. Invoker just came up as the biggest offender when it came to
so much of that just felt like that class would not be fun to play. Like at all. I'd avoid the Invoker in this game like the Plague as written.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, thematically there's a lot to like with these, and there's plenty to like with the theme. It's just in the execution where it's not going to be as fun if you're stuck with two options for the most part. You know, kind of the same reason why people find fighters in certain fantasy games not as fun, because no matter how you try to dress it up, you're doing nothing but basic attack. You know, that kind of issue.
Yeah.
Especially when some of the other people at the table are doing a hell of a lot more than basic attack.
Yeah, that's not even an issue of how good your basic attacks are. It's just you'll want to do more.
Mm-hmm.
But that's another tangent for another day.
Oh yeah. Now that being said, next week we'll be covering advancement and aetherology. We do have one more one shot before we finish up with Megalos, but I am confident that we will get through it and give our final thoughts before the month is out. In fact, let me look at the schedule here. So yeah,
we should be finishing Megalos up just before I go on vacation. Convenient timing.
Yeah, I would say so. So, with that said, as always, a sincere thanks to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come all the way to my monastery and enjoy the madness that happens here. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
Hãy subscribe cho kênh Ghiền Mì Gõ để không bỏ lỡ 上洛が上長年関税を往年関税を